folks, we're going to talk about presidential transitions and some related laws that go along with transitioning, let's say, President-elect, that's right, President-elect Donald Trump to President Donald Trump. What do transition teams do? What's the process like? And what are some of the legal issues that might pop up in the context of the same? Let's talk all about it, because you need to be the smartest person in the room. And to read the newspapers now, it might be helpful to hear from someone that's actually served on a presidential transition team. You're going to do that in one moment. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Box of Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and author of a new law review article in the Georgetown Journal of Law and Public Policy, a very important journal at the Georgetown Law School. Very important article about the Second Amendment, how to apply it. The title of it is Dangerous but Not Unusual. Dangerous but Not Unusual. Mistakes commonly made by courts in post-Bruin litigation. I lay out exactly a step-by-step sippy cup way to apply the Second Amendment in litigations dealing with the various issues, everything from sensitive places to age restrictions to gun bans. Check out the article, link to it in the description of this video. It's totally free. Just click on it and download it from the Georgetown Law School. Totally fine. And but I think for those of you who want to get geeky, if you're a law clerk, if you're a lawyer, if you're a scholar, you're a historian, you're just interested in the Second Amendment, I think you'll find this article quite compelling. Let me know if you disagree. All right, folks. So obviously what we're going through now, and you're reading a lot in the paper, that's why I wanted to do this video, about the presidential transition process, whereby Donald Trump goes from the presidential elect, or the president-elect Donald Trump, and in January will become President Donald Trump again, the 47th president of the United States. But I want to talk about this transition process because there's some history to this and some other observations I want you to be aware of. To begin with, before September 11th, 2001, transition processes usually started in earnest after someone had won the presidency. So you would have the election in November, someone would win the White House. After they won the White House, they would generally start the transition process in earnest. And then, of course, they would be sworn in January, and they would start appointing people to the various cabinet positions and other jobs that go into running the federal government in the executive branch. After September 11th, 2011, there was a change in the world. And one of the changes was a change in how transitions worked. But before I tell you how they work now and what Donald Trump is doing, I wanted to step back and explain to you how this came about, the modern environment for transitions, presidential transitions. That is this. After September 11, 2001, there was a lot of review about what happened, how did this happen, should the government have known better and thwarted this terrorist attack in some way. As part of this process, there was speculation by some that one of the issues that had arisen that made America less prepared for 9/11 than it should have been was that the transition process from President-elect George W. Bush to President George W. Bush was delayed. Why? You know why. Back in 2000, the presidential election of 2000, you had a delay in who was the president because George W. Bush won the White House for all intents and purposes, and then Al Gore brought a lawsuit and a series of lawsuits in Florida arguing that the votes were not properly counted and so on and so on. Ultimately, after a series of litigations, it went up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and in the decision of Bush versus Gore, the Supreme Court said that George Bush had won the race, which he had. He was never behind in Florida, and there was other shenanigans with the panhandle, but we're not going to discuss the 2000 election right here and right now, beyond saying the following, that this delay of a month before George W. Bush became the official president-elect, some people claim caused or contributed to the failures on 9/11 because George W. Bush's transition process was delayed by the litigation so that they weren't able to properly staff up all their intelligence and national security jobs in a timely fashion because they lost a month of the transition period between the election and the winning of the litigation in Florida that gave rise to George W. Bush, the president. Now, whether or not that happened or whether or not there's a causal effect there, one can speculate and debate that, but that's not the purpose of today's video. Because this was a legitimate concern and people raised it, after 9/11, Congress eventually, after much debate, enacted a federal law called the Presidential Transition Act. Under the Presidential Transition Act, it said basically that starting around August of every election year for the presidency, both parties, both candidates, will be given the opportunity to start the formal transition process by virtue of signing agreements that give you access to government buildings, pursuant to an agreement with the government GSA, basically the Government Services Administration that runs the buildings and the facilities, and provide you with computers and other equipment that allow you the opportunity to start the transition process, which means reviewing people, grabbing resumes, researching people on the internet, and so on and so on. Now, that's what the law provides. So both the Republican candidate and the Democratic candidate were able to do this under this law. And what happened, though, is so that was fine, and that's what parties have been doing and the presidents have been doing for years. Then we have 2016. And you may recall, and this is significant to know this, in 2016, Donald Trump and his transition team, including me, I was on it, we would participate in the process and vet people and research people and figure out who might fit where. But above my pay grade, to say the least, there were meetings between Donald Trump and Michael Flynn and other people with the deep state. Because part of this transition process allowed Donald Trump as candidate to get certain security briefings. The whole idea being that we want a president who becomes the president to get the ball, we want it to be a smooth transition to the next administration, and it's helpful to get some of these people up to speed. Now, what happened was, it turns out because of this Operation Crossfire and some of these other issues identified and investigated by people like Senator Chuck Grassley, it turns out that the deep state was out to get Donald Trump. We now know this. In 2016, we didn't know how bad the deep state was, but it's obviously now we know. We now know. The point is that during this transition period, there's evidence, substantial evidence, if not confirmed, although I think it's actually basically confirmed, that parts of deep state were spying on, investigating Donald Trump's campaign. Theoretically, as a pretext, because there was some concern of foreign involvement, that was the pretext. But the reality was, based on what I've read, this was really about looking for a way to take down Donald Trump as an insurance policy in the unlikely event he defeated Hillary Clinton, which of course he did. And as you know from that process, a lot of bad things happened, which we're not going to regurgitate and go over in this video, because that's not the point of this video. But suffice it to say that the transition process that was supposed to be allowing both parties access to information and to resources to have a smooth transition did not go that swimmingly for Donald Trump in the end, not because the transition wasn't working well, but because the deep state used the transition opportunity to essentially spy and look at Donald Trump and get information from him and his campaign. So as a consequence of what I just said, now, today, in the year of our Lord 2024, Donald Trump does have a transition team, but he's currently not using that government-oriented process that I described that's available to his campaign and to the president-elect's office, Donald Trump. He's chosen to, so far, not to use that government process, and I don't blame him. He is, as far as I know, as of now, refused to engage in or hear any security briefings, and I don't blame him. Because I would not want, if I were President Trump, I wouldn't want any briefings of intelligence information or security information or any of that stuff from Deep State, because the next thing that's going to happen is Deep State's going to leak information that I, President Donald Trump, did something wrong. So he wisely, in my opinion, is not taking any of this information. He's not going to these briefings, and none of this, nor as I understand, has he signed the relevant memorandum of understanding to allow him to engage in the transition using government resources. He seems to be, from all evidence, his own private resources, his own private people, his own private computers, his own private lawyers, his own private friends, and part of the campaign, and so on and so on. And I agree with that decision, frankly. But some people, like Jeremy Raskin, the congressman from Maryland, doesn't like this and has raised issues about whether or not this is appropriate, as opposed to using the typical government-oriented GSA transition process that's made available to President Trump under the Presidential Transition Act. But I understand why they don't want to touch Deep State with a 10-foot pole until they absolutely have to. Now, some people on the left are criticizing President Trump, saying that by doing it this way, it's going to slow his ability to transition into a new government. But Donald Trump has already been the president. I think he knows what he needs to do, and I don't think he needs to get up to speed by having meetings with Joe Biden, because I doubt Joe Biden even knows what's going on around the world. So what's the point of meeting with Joe Biden and these other people who hate Donald Trump and are likely may just as easily give misinformation than accurate information? Again, that's speculation on my part, or a concern I would have if I were President Trump. But again, I'm not President Trump. Now, the only other thing I want to say about the transition here that I think is helpful is there's a book out there. Now, this is a book you almost certainly have never heard of. And I just checked. I don't think it's been officially published this year yet. It's running a little late. But if you are a Washington, D.C. geek, and I strongly encourage you not to be, but if you want to be a Washington, D.C. geek, you need to know about this book. This book is referred to as the Plum book. The Plum book. Plum. And that's because of the color of the book. Now, what is the Plum book? The Plum book is the comprehensive book of all the jobs, of which there are thousands, that the President of the United States has the legal authority to appoint people for those jobs. It's the political positions at the ATF, the political positions in the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Agriculture, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Education, and so on and so on. So if you want to see what kinds of jobs are available through a presidential appointment and the like, you want to Google and check out the most recent Plum book of federal jobs available to you by a presidential appointment. So if you're a real Washington geek and you're trying to work for the administration, you will be very familiar with the Plum book, which lays out the jobs, the qualifications, and any other information that describes the work associated with those particular federal government jobs. Like what does a cabinet position do? Which cabinet positions? What is the head of the Department of Education, right? What do they do if you get that job? What is the director of the ATF? What does the ambassador to Brazil do? And so on and so on. So you may want to check out the Plum book just for entertainment value. Last I checked, the issue that was supposed to come out in 2024, last I checked, had not technically been published. I don't even know if it's online yet, but it's got to be coming online really quick, because obviously it needs to be used by the current transition team to figure out what's going on and who's going to get appointed where. The big cabinet positions will always be filled first. I'm sure Donald Trump right now is laser focused on the most senior positions in the White House and making sure his cabinet is picked first, because that requires a little bit of time, because once you become president, you submit a piece of paper, a appointment, if you will, to the United States Senate, at which point they start their process of vetting the person and ultimately scheduling a hearing and then voting on that person. So to get the confirmation process working in the U.S. Senate, the president has to make that paper appointment and submit it to the Senate. Until Donald Trump is the president of the United States, he cannot submit that nomination piece of paper to the United States Senate. So there's a lot of work between now and then to identify the people for these various positions. He always will start with the cabinet positions first, the most senior positions at the White House, like the White House counsel's office and so on and so on. Now, let me wrap up as to what you should care most about involving the Second Amendment. Now, of course, we should all be worried about illegal immigration. We should all be worried about border security. All of this is very important for the Second Amendment, because if we overwhelm America with tens of millions of illegal aliens and other people that have no connection to our tradition, no connection to our culture, and they all move to the blue states and they all move to these states and outvote Americans with American values, that could be a problem. So, of course, all these other issues do impact our role and our ability to function as American gun owners and citizens, including, of course, whether the economy is good or bad and whether or not we're in a war or not. But with that said, from a specific Second Amendment point of view, let me tell you what we should be cheering for. The most important position by far when it comes to our Second Amendment rights will be, in addition to the presidency, of course, will be who becomes the Attorney General of the United States. That's the most important job. They will set the policy. They will dictate what happens in the Department of Justice, including with the ATF. After that, the next most important position is a job that the president will work with the Attorney General on to pick the person to be the Solicitor General of the United States. The Solicitor General of the United States is the person that represents the United States government before the United States Supreme Court. They're sometimes even referred to as the 10th Justice. There are 9 Supreme Court justices. The Solicitor General is sometimes called the 10th Justice because of the familiarity. They're always members of the U.S. Supreme Court Bar. They're very familiar with Supreme Court practice. And, of course, they're political appointees, so their politics tends to align very closely with that of the current President of the United States. So the Attorney General is the most important, followed by the Solicitor General. After that, the Attorney General will help select the Deputy Attorney Generals, which are kind of the head of the Civil Division, the head of the Criminal Division, and also will pick, of course, after that, the head of the ATF, very important for us, as well as the head of the Office of Civil Rights, which I'm going to try to encourage, we'll just leave it at that, the White House to use more effectively the Office of Civil Rights to bring appropriate litigations and to weigh in on critical matters, touching fingers with our constitutional rights, because so far the Office of Civil Rights has historically been just a weapon for the left wing in America, but civil rights encompass, as far as I'm concerned, the right to keep and bear arms, the right to free speech, parental rights, all sorts of other things, perhaps requiring voter ID, because if people are able to illegally vote, they cancel my vote, which disenfranchises me, because people without the right to vote, they cancel my vote, and again, that disenfranchises me. So there's a lot of different perspectives that one can consider when viewing the Office of Civil Rights within the Department of Justice as a sword to advance American values and American liberties, as opposed to what it's largely been, which is just a weapon to advance progressivism in America, which I do not think is ultimately good for our country or the world for that matter. All right, folks, well, I hope you learned a little bit something here today about presidential transitions and the process. You'll read a lot about it in the newspaper, so I wanted to bring you up to speed with some general things that will help you be the smartest person in the room. Make sure you follow me on X now, at 4boxesdiner. We have over 19,000 followers over there. Please help me get to 200,000 subscribers here on YouTube. We keep trying to grow the channel. Make sure you like this video and subscribe, and I look forward to talking to all you again very, very soon here at the 4 Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.